Okay, so we're just going to briefly talk through chapters 23 through 25. So at the end of chapter 22, if you remember, Miss Stephanie comes in and announces that Bob Ewell just spat on Atticus and said that he would get him if it took the rest of his life. So in chapter 23, then we get Atticus's reaction to this. So how does Atticus react to Bob Ewell's threat? How does he react? Is he scared? Is he confused? Like, what? How does he react? Yeah, he just walks away, right? He says, I wish he wouldn't chew tobacco, right? But he just isn't really going to entertain it, right? On page 292, he brings up this idea of like standing in someone else's shoes again, right? Which he brought up, I don't know, all the way back in like chapter 2 or 3 when he's talking to Scout about Miss Carolyn at school. Okay. At the bottom of page 292, he says, Jem, see if you can stand in Bob Ewell's shoes a minute. I destroyed his last shred of credibility at that trial, if he had any to begin with. The man had to have some kind of comeback, his kind always does. So if spitting in my face and threatening me saved Mayella Ewell one extra beating, that's something I'll gladly take. He had to take it out on somebody, and I'd rather it be me than that house full of children out there. Okay, so he's just kind of like, he was embarrassed. He had to like get it out of his system. But Atticus thinks that that's going to be the end of it. Okay. Pages 293 to 295 really are just talking a lot about sort of like the court system and how the judicial system works. At the bottom of page 295, though, Atticus talks about sort of, I don't know, just kind of about the prejudice and sort of discrimination that Black people are facing in their town. He says, as you grow older, you'll see white men cheat Black men every day of your life, but let me tell you something, and don't you forget it. Whenever a white man does that to a Black man, no matter who he is, how rich he is, or how fine a family he comes from, that white man is trash. So Atticus here is pretty much saying like that, everyone needs to be treated equally, that it's unfair the way that this court case came out, and that we talked about the idea of the courts should be this place where everyone is treated equally, but Atticus points out that some people will bring their prejudice into the courtroom with them, and that's how you get things like the verdict in Tom's case. They find out which member of the jury was needing convincing, right? We find out that there were 11 people that were ready to vote guilty right away, and there was one person who held out and thought maybe he was innocent. And we find out what family that person was from. So what family was it? Yeah, the Cunninghams. Okay, so this might be surprising if you remember the Cunninghams were in that lynch mob that came to try to attack Tom. So just kind of curious coincidence there. And if you remember, Scout had run-ins with Walter Cunningham as well when school first started. Okay. So then Aunt Alexander kind of goes on this rant about like status, and she's very concerned with like their social status compared to other families in the town, and so she's just kind of going on and on about that. On page 302, we see a little bit more of Jem and how he's maturing. He says, don't let Auntie aggravate you, just kind of telling Scout to like brush off what she's saying. So we see Jem kind of becoming a little more mature and trying to pass along that wisdom to his sister. And we also just see sort of some of Jem's, I don't know, he's just maturing, right? Like his like innocence that he thought about the town, he's coming to realize that the people in the town are not what he thought they were. And on the page 304, Scout is talking with him as well. But she is kind of saying, you know, Jem's really thinking about like the social status of the town, kind of what Aunt Alexandra was talking about. Scout just says, I think there's just one kind of folks, right? So she's just saying like social status doesn't mean anything. Like everyone is just people, right? People are people no matter what. So again, we talked about at the beginning, this idea of discrimination and prejudice based on like not just race, but also social class. Scout here is kind of saying like, basically, why can't we just treat everybody the same no matter who their family is, right? Which is very different from how she was acting at the beginning of the book as well. And then Jem comes back with saying like, okay, but if there's just one kind of folks, why can't they all get along? If they're all alike, why do they go out of their way to despise each other? And then he says, Scout, I think I'm beginning to understand something. I think I'm beginning to understand why Boo Radley stays shut up in his house all the time. It's because he wants to stay inside. So kind of like he's saying like that Boo just doesn't want to be a part of this kind of ugliness and hatred that people have towards each other, right? They've always assumed that someone is forcing him to stay in their house. And Jem now is kind of thinking like, maybe he just wants to stay in there because he doesn't want to deal with all of this ugliness that the town has for each other. And for the way that they treat people who are different. All right, any questions on chapter 23? Chapter 24 is just, the only thing I really want to point out is that there's a lot of irony in this chapter. The missionary ladies who come over for tea, they're talking about this tribe in Africa and how they need to help them and they need to save them and they need to like send resources to them and all of these things. And it's just kind of ironic because they're so concerned about, you know, these people in a far off place, but they have absolutely no concern for the people that actually live in their own town who also might need help, right? If you think about like Helen Robinson, Tom's wife, who can't get hired anywhere, and his children who are probably suffering because of her lack of income. They don't care about that, right? They think that they deserve that, but they're very concerned about these people that they've never even met in this far off place. So it's just kind of some irony and just kind of shows some of the hypocrisy of the town. But we do find out that what happens to Tom. We learn something about Tom in this chapter. What happened to him? Yeah, so he was trying to escape the prison, and we find out that he was killed trying to escape. Okay. In chapter 25, we'll go into that a little bit more. So then in chapter 25, again, a pretty short chapter, just kind of talking about the fallout of Tom's death. Mr. Underwood writes a long editorial. And again, we see sort of the same reference to sort of, you know, it's a sin to kill someone who's, you know, basically not hurting anyone, right? It's just like a senseless killing. And, you know, it's pretty bold of Mr. Underwood to write this. Obviously, this is not the predominant opinion in the town. A lot of people think that he deserves what he got, or that it's just typical that he would run and then that he would get killed. So there's not a ton of sympathy in the town for him. So Mr. Underwood is kind of taking a little bit of a stand writing about that. And then, but Mr. Ewell does say it's one down and two more to go. So the children continue to be a little concerned about what Mr. Ewell might do, even though Atticus is largely unconcerned and doesn't think that Mr. Yule poses a threat anymore. Okay, but the kids still kind of have that concern. Okay, so any questions over those 3 chapters, 23, 24, 25? Do you have any questions over 23, 24, or 25? Okay.